Hey, here's a car I haven't done a video on in a long time, so I figure I'll update everybody of this car. I haven't started this thing in probably 5 months. Well, here we go. Oh, almost. Oh, come on now, you can do it. You got 30 pounds of fuel pressure. There we go. It's been about 6 months or so since I started this, and as you can see, it's got a really nice digital dash. There's my nice fuel pressure gauge, exhaust temp, boost, air fuel. Don't have much fuel, but I usually run 100 octane avgas in this. But this is a 1986 300ZX turbo, and it's got T-tops. Something you don't see on cars these days. I can smell that avgas. That smells nice. Here's the car. There's the T-tops. Since the last video I did on this, which was a long time ago, I had the windows re-tinted. Get boosting. That's my new sticker. Alright. Got T37 style wheels. The car's got a lot of dust on it because I haven't started it in a while. Here's the back view. Classic Nissan sports car. A true sports car, a two-seater. Nice tinted windows, as you can see. Put some racing stripes on there a long time ago. Here's the engine, the BG30 turbo. But I've done a lot of work to this because the original engine had a very small turbo, no intercooler, and that really made a difference on how it boosted. Right now, this car has a TO4E turbocharger, dual fan, big radiator. There's the air intake. And there's my nice big intercooler right there, see? Look at that. Big intercooler. There's my tubes going from the intercooler intercooler. This car has a lot of mods done to it. I've also incorporated an external wastegate system on the opposite side of the engine for balance. There's the external wastegate, which goes to the crossover tube on the engine. Well, I'm planning on taking this TO4E turbocharger off and installing a really big billet wheel T84 turbocharger because it has an 84mm compressor wheel, and it also has a 63AR turbine housing, which makes the spool very fast. And the style of the new turbocharger is a GT35. That's the style it is. I'm going to show you the turbochargers. Right now this has a TO4E. The turbocharger I had before on this car was a T70, which was a really big turbo. But the new turbo I'm going to put on is even bigger than that. More to follow. This turbocharger is the first style of turbo I ever ran on my 300ZX turbo. It incorporates a internal wastegate, which means the wastegate's built onto the turbocharger, and it actuates a valve. And the valve, you look inside the turbine housing, but right behind here is a little valve that lets out extra exhaust not needed to spool the turbocharger. That's how an internal wastegate works. And this was a really good turbocharger. It ran nice. But then I wanted to go bigger. So my second turbo I ran in the 300ZX Turbo was this T70 turbocharger. It still had a T3 flange, but it had an 82 AR exhaust housing, so it took a while to spool up, where the first turbo I ran had a 63 AR turbine housing, so it spooled up much faster. But this T70 here, as you can see, has a much bigger compressor and compressor housing. AR70 compressor housing, and this is an AR50. So the first turbo I ran in my Z after I removed the stock one was an AR50, basically a TO4E internal wastegate. Second turbo I ran in my Z is AR70, or you could call it a T70 turbocharger. Has a 70 AR compressor housing and a big compressor wheel, T3 flange, and an 83 turbine housing, and quite a large turbocharger. You compare it to the other one on the TO4E, it's a little bit smaller turbo. Now, the turbo I just received in the mail that I just ordered a little bit ago, here's my newest turbo right here. This is a GT35 with a billet compressor wheel, and you can see compared to the other two, it's a much bigger compressor housing, a much bigger wheel. Look at the wheel here, look at the wheel there, and look at the wheel there. This wheel is huge. Big compressor wheel. Big GT35 turbocharger. And what's really good about this turbo, it's kind of a combination between this turbo and this turbo. This turbo has a small compressor housing and a pretty small compressor, but it's bigger than most T3 turbos. Now this one has a bigger compressor and a bigger compressor housing, which gives you more volume and boost, but it's got a much larger turbine housing, which means it takes more RPMs to spool. This turbo, since it has a 63 AR compressor housing, takes very little RPMs to spool, so around just before 3,000, this thing's pulling real nice. This thing takes about to 4,000 to start pulling, but this turbo has a bigger compressor than this turbo, but it has a 63 AR turbine housing, which means you're going to get the best of both worlds. Best of both worlds. You're going to have the big compressor, the big compressor housing, the giant billet wheel compressor. Compared to this one, it dwarfs it. But instead of having the giant turbine housing, this one has a small AR63 turbine housing and a huge turbine in there, which means this turbo is going to spool really fast. It'll spool like a TO4E off the line, but so much more boost and volume will come with this turbocharger. And since it has a small turbine housing and a big turbine, it's going to spool really fast and spool to the high end of RPMs as well. So this turbo is a combination of this one and this one. The TO4E, this turbo has the same turbine housing, but a larger turbo than this one, and a larger compressor housing than this one, and a larger compressor wheel. This compressor wheel, if you look at them side by side, it dwarfs that compressor wheel. This is an 84 AR compressor wheel, 84 millimeter compressor wheel, with the same housing, the GT35 housing. So basically it's an AR70 compressor housing, but with a much larger compressor rotor. So this thing's really gonna move. It's gonna move a lot of air, it's gonna move a lot of boosted air, and it's gonna respond really quickly off the line thanks to its smaller turbine housing, but a large turbo. Let's compare. Here's the AR63 with the big billet wheel turbo, and let's look at the T70 side by side. You can see the 63 AR housing is much smaller, so it's going to spool the turbine fast, but look at the size difference of these turbines. The new turbine really dwarfs the T70's turbine, and the housing on the T70 is much larger. See, look at the housing difference. Big T70 housing, which means it takes a lot more RPMs to spool. There's a 63 AR housing and a huge turbo inside, which is even bigger than the T70. This turbine here spools really fast with the smaller housing and a larger turbo wheel. So you'll look at the two turbos together, and then you can look at the third one too. You know, we'll compare them, because that's also an AR63. Big, huge one right here. But that means it's more RPMs to spool it. So, comparing the turbos together, let's take a peek. T70, the big GT35, T70, and TO4E right here. I'll take the little cap off. Look at all three of these together. There you go. There you go, a 50 AR compressor housing, a 70 AR compressor housing, and a larger compressor, and an AR70 housing, but with an 84 billet compressor wheel, 84 millimeter. So you look at the three turbochargers together, and this one far surpasses the T70 and the TO4E, because this turbo is kind of a combination between the T70 and the TO4E. This T84 has the turbine housing the same as the TO4E, which means it spools fast. But yet, this turbo has a large compressor wheel that's even larger than the T70 and the TO4E. And look at the difference in compressor discharge. And then this one. Wow, look at the differences. So basically, bottom line is, my new billet wheel T84 turbocharger, the GT35, with the AR63 compressor housing, this thing's going to spool fast, move a lot of boosted air, and move it at just as much pressure as this turbo and this turbo, but more volume because it's got a much bigger compressor housing. It's going to spool like a TO4E, which is on low RPMs, probably about 2,800. This thing's going to start spooling and pulling hard, unlike the this turbo's similar size to this one on the compressor size, but the turbine housing is so big, it takes at least 4,000 RPMs to spool this turbine to even feel any boost. Where this one will spool like the TO4E, and you'll be getting big volume, big pressure boost under 3,000 RPM and beyond. And it'll pull all the way to redline. So this is the ultimate turbocharger for the 300ZX Turbo, which has the VG30 single overhead cam V6, the Z31. And since I have an external wastegate, I can't wait to put this turbocharger on. It's really going to make this old, classic Nissan 300ZX Turbo fly. Well, here's the introduction to my new turbocharger. I'm going to stick in the Nissan 300ZX Turbo. And I hope you like this. Please like, share, and subscribe. Share this video with your friends. This will probably be the biggest turbocharger put on a Z31. All right, and hope you enjoyed this video and mad boosting.